Good evening. It's nice to be back here at Genting. A little bit cooler tonight. I see some of you are wearing some jackets. We ran into the cloud bank as we were coming up the road. Luckily we weren't too far from here. But that fog was definitely closing in fast and thick. And even your car park, we decided that looking for a parking space had taken on an entirely new meaning this evening because we just couldn't see the parking spaces. Definitely a bit cooler up here than it was down in Kuala Lumpur. But it's always a pleasure to come up here. So, how have we been going with our meditation? We've been getting a little bit in, a lot of bit in, a little bit in. I was talking to a man this morning, and he's having a few problems in his life, just the usual sorts of problems that people seem to have in life. But he said to me, I don't have time to meditate. And I said to him, with these problems you're telling me about, you don't have time not to meditate. It's, every day, without wanting to sound morbid, but every time you go to bed, you're shorter of breath. You're one day closer to death. And it's very difficult to meditate on your deathbed. So it is important that we try to get a little bit of meditation in. And so I just want to read something out here. This is from the Dhammapada, verse 183. Verse 183 says, abandoning all unwholesome actions, generating and maintaining wholesome actions, purifying and disciplining one's own mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. So, we understand abandoning unwholesome actions. This is why we take and try to keep the precepts to the best of our ability, because when we keep the precepts, we're abandoning unwholesome actions and we're generating and hopefully maintaining wholesome actions. But this is done by purifying and disciplining one's own mind. So the purification of the mind, of course, comes through meditation. And not only are we meditating, but we need to heedfully guard the sense doors. And we all know the sense doors: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and also thinking. We run around chasing after sense desires, looking to see, a pretty flower, a pretty bird, pretty butterflies, We don't want to see ugly flowers, and stuff like that. We're always looking for the nice things in life. Nice smells, nice tastes, nice sensations, nice bodily sensations. So we're always chasing after these things. And we need to be aware that although there's nothing wrong with enjoying looking at a nice flower, smelling something nice, it's when we start chasing after these desires that we run into trouble. And through the practice of meditation, we start to understand that things like, a pretty flower depends upon certain conditions coming together. It's got to be the right season. you've got to be looking at the right plant, you know. Some plants don't have pretty flowers on them. Some plants do. You know, so it's got to be the right season, you know. They've had to have had the right amount of water, the right amount of sunlight. And so we start to see that it's conditions that bring the flower into being. And of course, we all know that flowers eventually die, you know, because the conditions that were right to make the flower come out and look beautiful have changed, you know. And the flower will start to wither, start to lose its colour, get all droopy, and eventually it'll die. And it won't smell as nice as it used to either, you know. And so when we start to practice the meditation, we start to see that everything has a beginning. It lasts for as long as it lasts, and then it ceases. And the cessation gives rise to something else. And we see this when we're being mindful or aware of the in and out breath. You know, there's a beginning of the in-breath. It lasts for a certain period of time, and then it stops. You can't keep breathing in, you know. It hurts if you try it, because I've done it, just to see what it felt like. Not pleasant, you know. We can only fill our lungs to a certain degree, and then they stop being filled, you know, and if we keep trying to fill them, it becomes very painful. And so we have to breathe out. And so we start to see that the breathing in is actually the condition for the breathing out. You know, when we breathed in as far as we can breathe in, then we have to breathe back out again. So the breathing out is conditioned by the breathing in, and the breathing in is conditioned by the breathing out. And so these are the kinds of things that we start to see when we begin the meditation practice, you know. But we all know we've all struggled over the last few weeks, you know, to keep the mind in one place. But as I've said before, this is just because we're learning how to meditate. And, you know, as I say, we sit down and, you know, we have this idea that I'm going to have a tranquil, peaceful mind for the next 10, 15 minutes. Well, first of all, that's placing an expectation upon your meditation. And whenever we have expectations, we place ourselves in a position of failure, you know. And I know this is a hard one to come to grips with sometimes, because, you know, especially as lay people, you know, we have to have certain expectations, you know, we have to have certain desires, you know, like you desire to be able to work a full week to get a full week's pay, to be able to pay your rent, to be able to do whatever it is that you need to do with your money. But in meditation it's different, you know. Now, yeah, there are wholesome desires. The desire to meditate is a wholesome desire, you know. But we still need to be able to let go of the desire. But when we sit down and we say, oh yes, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to get a nice, calm, peaceful, tranquil mind, then we end up disappointing ourselves. And this is why I say we don't meditate to get anything. We meditate to get rid of things, you know. We have anger inside us. We have greeds, lusts, delusions. And these are the things that we're letting go of. These are the things we're trying to get rid of. As we get rid of them, then this peacefulness, this tranquility that you seek will actually arise all by itself, you know. But we sit down, we think we can do it very quickly. It's like going into a garbage heap. You know, you imagine if you've got your rubbish bin and it's full of trash, you know. And we take the rubbish bin to be the mind, and it's just been, you know, it's loaded up with trash. We think we can get a shovel and we're going to just shovel it out really quickly, and then we'll have this nice, clear, tranquil, peaceful mind. But in actual fact, it's more like using a teaspoon to try and get the rubbish out. It's not going to be a quick, fast process. It's going to be a long, slow, laborious process. But from the minute you take the first teaspoon of rubbish out, you've started. It's beginning. And so we just need to be able to find the time. We need to be able to sit down and begin the practice, But we need to keep our practice simple, no overcomplicating things. And try and stick to the best of your ability with one practice. A lot of people try to mix and match their practices up, and you end up achieving very little, So you need to take one practice and stay with that one practice, and then you will start to see results. This I can promise you, you'll start to see results. But we need to try and keep the practice going. It's too easy to give up, When things don't go well for us, we quit. Nah, not for me. And we decide we'll try something completely different. And we see this a lot with meditation, People tell me, I've tried it before, it didn't work. Oh, it doesn't matter, keep trying, Just sit down and keep trying. As I've said to you before, even if you do the 10 minutes or the 15 minutes and nothing happens, the mere fact that you sat for 10 or 15 minutes is an achievement within itself. But we forget this. We just think, I'm rubbish at meditation, But we're learning how to meditate. If you get up, if you abandon the meditation, that's not a good thing, And the mind will always try and get us to abandon things, especially things it doesn't like. And what it doesn't like is us trying to keep it under control, And so you have to, I remember years ago I was living in New Zealand. I was out in the country, and there was a feral cat, a wild cat. Well, it was more of a kitten, It wasn't very big at all. And it kind of lived fairly close by, It was hanging out all the time. So I would start putting out a saucer of milk, a little bit of food, and try and encourage the cat in. Try and stop the cat being quite so wild, It was a very scared cat, It wasn't used to human company. But I was a little bit impatient. I remember one day I'd got the cat, I've been pulling the saucer closer to me all the time to get the cat closer and closer, And it's come up one day and it's kind of watching me, but it starts to drink the milk, and I turn around, I stroked it, and this cat did 360s around my arm. There was blood pouring all over the place, because I'd become impatient with the cat. And so the cat went round and round my arm, and it just scratched the living daylights out of me. But I kept putting that saucer of milk out, And eventually one day the cat walked into the house, and it came and sat down beside me, It took patience, it took perseverance, And this is what our meditation practice is like. Sometimes the mind will do those 360s and just race round and round and round, And it just feels absolutely horrible. But that's okay. Just come back to the practice. And eventually the mind will calm down and it will settle. And you'll surprise yourself one day. You'll suddenly realize that your meditation practice went quite nicely. But it's the perseverance. It's like with that saucer of milk. I put that saucer out every day, twice a day. I put that saucer of milk out to try and get that cat. And in the end, it became a very, very friendly little kitty cat, It became part of the family. And the calm, peaceful mind will also become a part of your family. And so all we need to do is practice. So as I was saying the other week, there are things we can do. Some people do some chanting before they start their meditation practice off. And the chanting can help to concentrate the mind. It can help to bring the mind to stay at one place. And it does start to make the mind feel a bit peaceful, you know. And so we can start with that. For others, perhaps the metta meditation, you know, especially when we, you know, start off giving metta to ourselves. I said a lot of people think, well, that's a bit egotistical, you know, may I be happy. But if you're not happy, you can't give happiness to other people, you know. If you are miserable, that's what you can give other people, is misery, you know. And so when we sit down, you know, because often people do metta meditation after the practice, but there's nothing wrong with doing metta meditation before the practice, you know. And it's allowing yourself to be happy. It's also allowing yourself to make mistakes. You know, so many times we make mistakes and then we feel so guilty about making mistakes. And you've heard me say this before and you'll hear me say it again. Guilt is a stupid emotion. You know, it is. It's like, you know, you've got a backpack and you do something that you shouldn't have done, so you pick a big rock up and you put it in the backpack and you keep wandering around. Now, if you do that, that backpack's going to get heavier and heavier. And every time you do something that you don't think you should have done, you pick up another rock, you've got this guilt, and you put it in the backpack. It just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. So we don't do guilt. We do regret. And there's a big difference between guilt and regret. So we do something wrong, we regret it, you know, so, oh man, I wish I hadn't done that. Sometimes we get angry, you know, somebody says something, somebody does something, and we react. We react angrily, you know, you stupid person, or something like that, you know. We get a bit angry, we say nasty things to them. Sometimes we can even lash out physically against things that we don't like. So we regret when we do this, you know, but we don't carry the guilt feeling of doing it. So when we regret it, we then forgive ourselves, you know. We understand that we're only human, we can make mistakes. So we regret it, and we say, I'll try harder next time not to allow that to take place, you know. And this is where you start to forgive yourself. You know, sometimes we run around saying, oh yeah, I forgive that person for what they said, I forgive that person for what they said. But then we find it very difficult to forgive ourselves for things that we said, for things that we did. But that's guilt. It's guilt that prevents us from forgiving. So when we regret something, we're able to forgive. We may not forget it, but we can still forgive it. And we have to start with ourselves. We have to start feeling good about ourselves. And the more good we feel about ourselves, the more good we can actually start to project out onto other people. So we'll start the meditation practice now. What that gong? So what we'll do, we'll spend the first few minutes. You can just do the first few minutes, whatever, if you're going to just quietly chant to yourself, or if you're going to quietly do metta meditation. So start off, get yourself relaxed, you know, get the body relaxed, get the body in the position that you're going to use for your meditation practice. Spend a moment or two. That's right. See somebody putting a pillow underneath their knee. That's fine, you know, because sometimes that leg coming down puts a lot of strain on the upper thigh. It can really hurt. So if you put something underneath to support it and it feels better, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, you know. People sitting in chairs, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Find that comfortable position. Spend a couple of minutes just getting yourself comfortable. Relax your body. As you relax your body, you'll actually feel something happening inside your head. That's your mind is going to start to relax up at the same time. And then once you've done your little piece of chanting, or your meditation, then you can begin your practice. Okay. So how did that go? Probably about 15 minutes, maybe 5 minutes to get ready, 15 minutes. So how many of you were able to keep the mind on the breath for 15 minutes? One over here. How many of you found your minds going to the past? Lots of giggles. How many of you found your minds wandering to the future? It's amazing, really. If I was running a meditation course and I said, I want you to all for the next 15 minutes think about something pleasant from the past, you'd have no problems. You know, your minds would go back to something pleasant that you did with family, with friends. Maybe something you ate, a nice restaurant you went to, day at the beach, day at the park. We'd be able to go and we'd be able to dwell. The 15 minutes would pass so quickly. If I asked you to think about something pleasant that might be coming up in the future, you know, maybe you've got something planned. Next time you have holidays, you might be going somewhere nice. And so you'd be able to take your mind to that. And again, your 15 minutes would go so quickly. But that little gap between the past and the future that we tend to call the present moment, so difficult to keep a hold of. You know? It's strange, isn't it? You know, these memories of things that happened before, we can keep our mind on. These ideas of things that are going to happen in the future or might happen in the future, we can keep our mind on. But what we're doing right now, in this present moment, we can't do it. No, it's just such a difficult thing for us to practice. But that's okay. We get there. You know, we get there. We just, you know, as I say, we keep the practice up, you know. We don't allow ourselves to become disappointed, you know. We are very, very easily disappointed, you know. We are our own worst judges. You know. People don't judge us half as harshly as we're capable of judging ourselves, you know. The mere fact that each Tuesday you come here shows a commitment, you know, a commitment to at least try to understand the practice. And even if this is the only practice you get during the week, at least, you know, you're getting more practice than some people. So that's something that you can be happy about. And the fact that it's very difficult, that's okay, you know, because that's actually the reality of meditation, you know. Also, you know, often people come and they think they're going to sit down for half an hour in a attain jhana. It's not going to happen, you know. Often we're lucky to gain a few seconds of mindfulness, you know. But if we keep practicing, It just comes and it comes and it comes. So, Dhammapada, verse 184. Enduring patience is the highest asceticism. The Buddhas say that imperturbability, nibbana, is the supreme state. One is not a renunciate if he hurts another. Only one who does not harm others is a true saint, a samana. If we look at the Majjhima Nikaya 21, it's the simile of the saw. I guess most of you are probably fairly familiar with this. It says, monks, even if bandits were to carve you up savagely, limb by limb, with a two-handled saw, he among you who let his heart get angered, even at that would not be doing my bidding. Even then you should train yourselves. Our minds will be unaffected, and we will say no evil words. We will remain sympathetic with a mind of goodwill, and with no inner hate. We will keep pervading these people with an awareness imbued with goodwill, and beginning with them, we will keep pervading the all-encompassing world with awareness imbued with goodwill, abundant, expansive, immeasurable, free from hostility, free from ill will. That's how you should train yourselves. Monks, if you attend constantly to this admonition of the simile of the sword, do you see any aspects of speech, slight or gross, that you could not endure? No, Lord. Then attend constantly to this admonition on the simile of the sword. That will be your long-term offer in happiness. That's what the Blessed One said, and gratified the monks delighted in his words. So we can see from this simile the need for patience. I'm not suggesting you go out and ask somebody to try and cut your legs off to see just how far you've gone, it's not recommended. But we can see that sometimes the smallest things can lead us to anger. Sometimes we get agitated just because of words, There's that saying, they say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Yeah, they do, actually. We get hurt very quickly when people call us names, Unless it's things like good looking, then we don't get upset at all, When people say nice things, we feel very proud. But even that's a problem, actually, feeling proud. But we can become very agitated just by people's words. So we need to endure these attacks. This patience is called, in Pali it's called Khanti, and it can only be developed when restlessness and aversion have been gotten rid of. And there's only one way of getting rid of restlessness and aversion. Yeah, it's meditation. There's no magic pill here. So, as I said to you earlier, we've got at least one lifetime full of junk cluttering up our minds, and we can't take a shovel to it. We're taking a teaspoon into it, maybe even something small, maybe even a toothpick, and trying to flick bits of garbage out. Maybe even a teaspoon is too big. So you can see that we need to have patience in this practice, and when we have the patience, we will attain the fruits. It's kind of like if you were to sit underneath a fruit tree, right? And you said, I'm going to sit underneath this fruit tree until some fruit falls off the tree and into my lap. Yeah. Who's going to get the most fruit? The person who sits there for 2 or 3 hours, or the person who keeps getting up and moving around to do something else? They sit for 2 minutes, they get up and they go away for 10 minutes. They come back, they sit for 2 minutes, Who's going to get the most fruit? The person who sits for the 2 hours? or the person who sits for 20 minutes of that 2 hours. When we have restlessness, when we have aversion, there's no chance of the fruit falling into our laps. You know? So we have to have the patience, the endurance to sit, to find the time for the practice. And when we do that, then you'll be sitting there all the time. A piece of fruit. When we sit there a bit longer, there'll be another piece of fruit. You know? This is the way that we get the fruit, is by enduring patiently, you know, no matter how hard it seems. And restlessness is something that, you know, we get very restless. You know, we sit down to meditate, and then all of a sudden we want to move. We want to get up. We want to do something different. Maybe we get pain in the leg, pain in the shoulders, pain in the back. So we decide we don't want to sit anymore. You know, we've got an aversion to the meditation. If you get a pain anywhere in your body, we change position. If we get a pain in the body, it means we're not sitting comfortably. You know? And so we just change the position that we're sitting in. But we don't stop the sitting. We continue to sit. You know? When we feel restless, we just overcome the restlessness. We know that the mind is trying to get us to go away from the meditation practice. And so we say, I see you. I see what you're doing. These are the things I call them sometimes. I call them having conversations with Mara. You know, you be sitting there and all of a sudden you get this idea that you've got something that would be much more pleasant to do. And so I have these little conversations with Mara from time to time, you know. It's like, yeah, I see you, Mara. I see what you're trying to do, you know. And you can't beat me, you know. And then I just go back to the practice. And these thoughts can keep arising, you know. Even I have thoughts arising and passing away, you know. And there's many a time that, you know, I mean, sometimes sitting there in Kuala Lumpur, it can get a bit warm, you know. I've been sitting there meditating and the sweat is pouring off of me. And it's not due to my effort. Well, it might be. But no, it's due to the heat, the humidity, you know. And sometimes that feels really, really uncomfortable. And you think, maybe I should just go up and have a shower. You know? But then you realize that, in actual fact, you're just coming up with an excuse to end your meditation period, you know. Doesn't matter if I sweat for the next 20 or 30 minutes. And so you just sit there and it's like, you know, the robes are getting drenched. But it doesn't matter, you know. I won't get up from that position. I will just remain seated until my meditation time is over. And this is what we have to start doing, you know. There's so many different reasons, so many excuses that we can come up with not to do the practice. It's easier not to practice than it is to practice, you know. And so we just have to find that way of enduring, you know. But we endure patiently, you know. Don't get stressed out about the endurance, you know. Just understand that, you know, I can do this, you know. And when you say I can do this, it's a positive reinforcement upon your own ability. You know? When we say I can't do this, it's a negative about your own abilities. And we don't need to be negative about ourselves. Plenty of people out there who are quite happy to be negative for us. Okay? We don't need to help them, you know. And so when we're sitting there and we think, I can't do it, then you think, yes, I can, you know. And we just sit for that little bit longer, you know. We endure patiently. And the Buddha says we have to guard the sense doors. with heedfulness. And one of the sense doors is thinking, you know. We often think of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting and touching as the sense doors. But there's also thinking, you know. This is another one that we need to guard. And so, we've got to be heedful. That's what the Buddha says. We need to guard the sense doors with heedfulness. So we've got to be very aware of what's happening at the sense doors. And so these desires to stop meditating, we need to be aware that that desire is there. Now we're being heedful of the thinking sense door, because that's very quick at taking us away. As can be other things, you know, you can be sitting down meditating and then you can hear people enjoying themselves doing whatever, or maybe you smell something nice cooking, you know, go and see who's cooking that. Might be something for me. We've got to be heedful of what our sense doors are doing to us all of the time, because they will all try and drag us away from the meditation practice. And we can't close our sense doors off. You know, even if you're an arahant, you can still smell things, see things, hear things, taste things, touch things. You know, but an arahant has let go of the attachment to what is seen, heard, smelt, tasted, touched. You know, we are trying to practice not to be attached to these things. You know, so we understand that that sounds nice, but for the next 10 minutes, that's not my business. For the next 15 minutes, that's not my business. You know, looking nice, well, often that doesn't concern us because most of us have a tendency to meditate with our eyes closed, so we don't see things. We might see things in our mind, but we don't physically see things happening, you know. And for those who meditate with their eyes half open, that's why I always say that then you need to bring your gaze downwards. You know, if you're the type of person who falls asleep easily with your eyes shut, so you decide to do the half open thing, you can't be looking up like this, because especially like if I was to sit here, for instance, there are people passing by all the time. You have some will stop and they do Anjali. There's all sorts of things happening out there, and my eyes can't help but see it. You know, that's what they do. Not very well at times, I'll admit. I have to start wearing these things, but my eyes still see stuff. You know, and so when we're meditating with our eyes open, we need to avert our gaze downwards. You know, kind of not focusing on one particular spot on the floor. If that makes sense. So, you know, our sense doors are there. We just need to be aware of the fact that, you know, when we hear something, we don't start to partake of the pleasure of what we're hearing. You know, or we don't start partaking of the pleasure of what it is that we're smelling. You know, so, and what we do is we're just aware, because when we start to smell something and we realize that now our mind has gone to the odor, or our mind has gone to the sound, or whatever it is, we realize then that our mind has actually wandered from the object of meditation. And so we just become aware that the mind has wandered, and we just bring it back, you know. We don't stay out there, you know, thinking, that sounds... And, you know, sound is a really funny thing. I used to say to people when I used to teach them up in Thailand, you know, that we hear something, you're sat there, you've got your eyes closed, and often there are lots of dogs at one of the temples I was at in Thailand, you know, many dogs. And dogs are no respecters of meditators. You know, if a dog feels like barking, it'll bark, you know. It doesn't matter how many signs you have, please observe noble silence, you know. The dogs seem to ignore this sign and they, you know, bark their heads off. And I was saying to the meditators once, you know, I said, when you're sitting there, I said, in actual fact, there is only sound. I said, you hear that? It's a sound, you know. But we actually put pictures to the sound. You know, so it's like, now we think, you know, oh, it's a dog. I bet you it's such and such a dog. I bet you some other dog's come and that dog is barking because that dog is... And we start to make these big pictures up. And I say to them, how do you know it's not me sitting outside the window going just to see how it disturbs you? We just assume it's a dog because we hear the noise, but it might not be. You know, it might be me being a bit silly. It might be me trying to test your meditation powers. But this is what we do. We start to make up stories that associate. It's the same with smells. We smell something, and then we can start to get this big scenario. There's like, oh, you know, maybe Mike and Jane are cooking together in the kitchen. And it's like, you know, it might not be anything like that, you know, but we start to project this whole big picture upon things. You know, our minds just proliferate, and they're quite amazing. So when you're sitting there practicing the meditation, then you realize that your mind's wandered. You just have to bring it back, you know. If you do hear a sound, you know, you have people walking past, people talk, you know, people cough. It's okay. You understand that your mind's wandered briefly, and you bring it back, you know. And I always say here, we bring it back lovingly. We bring it back gently. We bring it back with no anger. Because one of the things we're trying to get rid of in our meditation practice is anger. And so we don't need to be bringing anger into our meditation practice. You know, the very thing we're trying to get rid of, we've got a bad habit sometimes of developing. You know, so it's again to say we need to be gentle with one another. You know, when we sit there and we meditate, I mean, sometimes we can even get angry. I heard somebody say once that they got told off in a meditation class because they changed position and it disturbed somebody. And the person told them off who got disturbed. You know, we have to understand that, you know, some of us are going to change positions. Some of us might cough, you know. It's like, you know how difficult that is when you feel like you've got to go forward, got to sneeze, I mean, you know, you're sitting there meditating, you get some dust up your nose or whatever it is. You try and sit there for your entire meditation practice and not sneeze. Not possible. You're going to let it. And people can get a bit annoyed with this. If they get annoyed with this, they need to meditate some more. You know, because they're allowing anger to come up during their meditation session. So we need to be loving towards one another, but most especially we need to be loving towards ourselves. You know, we always need to have this patience towards ourselves. You know, we got to forgive ourselves, accept ourselves for what we are, for who we are, and just continue the practice. You know, we'll maintain all the time. The only bad meditation you'll ever do is the meditation that you don't do. You know, when we've said that tomorrow morning I'm going to do 15 minutes meditation, and then tomorrow morning you say, oh no, I don't think I will, that's a bad meditation session, you know, because not only did you quit the session, you didn't even start the session, you know. But these sessions that we do where it doesn't appear as if we've achieved anything, the fact that we sat for the 10 or the 15 minutes, we've achieved something. We've been patient. We've endured, you know. And as I said, keep this up, bits of fruit are going to start falling into your lap, you know. And you'll surprise yourselves eventually, you know, when you suddenly realize that, heck, I just meditated for 10 minutes. My mind stayed where I wanted my mind to be for 10 minutes. And you'll be feeling so calm and you'll be feeling so peaceful that you want to continue the practice, you know, and you want to start building on the practice. And then But don't sit down the next time expecting to get 10 minutes of a nice calm mind, because you may disappoint yourself. But at least you'll know that it's there. You'll have seen the possibilities. And then we keep practicing, and we keep practicing. And again, the fruit starts to drop, And more your practice will improve, And you'll really, really look forward to meditation. Because meditation should not be seen as a chore, I said before, I've seen meditation used as a punishment, oh my goodness, you can't do that to people, because that just puts people off their meditation practice, And the last thing I ever want to see people do is get discouraged in their meditation practice. I want people to feel encouraged in their meditation practice. I want people to look forward to even attempt to meditate. I want people to say, yes, I'm going to get up now. It's time for me to practice, and be happy that they're able to practice. None of us are getting any younger, Fact of life, I'm afraid. I was thinking today about, you see these advertisements on TV. And New Zealand is very strict on the way you do an advertisement. Because some years ago they used to say, whack this stuff on your face and your skin will be younger. Now the advert has to say your skin will look younger, or your skin will feel younger. They're not allowed to say that your skin will be younger, because that's a lie. Your skin is not getting younger, your skin is getting older, It's like like the woman who says, oh yes, my doctor told me I've got the skin of a 16-year-old, and you say, well, you better give it back, you're stretching it, you're putting wrinkles in it, We are getting older. We don't have time not to meditate, And I think it was Ajahn Chah who said, if you've got time to breathe, you've got time to practice. If you're not breathing, you've got no time to practice. Time's up, And so we need to constantly find some time to get in, even just a little bit of practice. A little bit of practice is better than no practice at all. Like I've said to you, even the simple thing, brushing your hair in the morning, we can use that as meditation. If that's the only meditation you're going to get in the day, when you're brushing your hair, don't be thinking about making breakfast. Don't be thinking about what you have to do at work. Just spend the time brushing your hair. Just being completely in the moment of brushing your hair. That's meditation, That is a form of meditation that we can all practice, because, I know you ladies do not go out of the house until you've brushed your hair. Because you're ladies, you're not men. Some men are quite happy just to run the finger through and it's done. But you ladies don't do that. You spend a little bit of time, This time can be meditation time. This is brushing your hair time. So you don't have to be thinking about making some eggs for breakfast. At this stage, it's brushing the hair time. 100% in the moment. So for the 2, 3, 45 minutes it takes you to get yourself ready in the morning, you can just be spending that time getting ready. Now you're in the moment. Now you're doing meditation. But there are times that you can just, you got a moment or two during the day, you're not being harassed by anybody, you've got a few minutes between jobs, we can watch our breath. Nobody even needs to know you're doing it. But you can just spend that time just trying to be aware of the breath between jobs. So we can all do it. So I think we'll try and get another few minutes of meditation in. So again, just relax up. Try to bring the mind to know, breathing in and breathing out. So, believe it or not, you've sat for 25 minutes. That's patience. So you think you can't do 10 minutes a day. You've just done 25 minutes. Yeah, we broke it up. 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Small talk in between. But you've just sat for 25 minutes with the intention of meditating. So you can all give yourselves a big pat on the back, chalk it up. 1 point for me, nothing for Mara. Yeah, this is the practice. You can be happy. I'm always happy. It's great to see. No matter how much of a struggle, and I know some of you guys are really struggling, but heck, you're here every Tuesday night. No matter how hard it is, you're here on Tuesday night. That you can give yourself a pat on the back for. This is patiently enduring, So it goes to prove that you want to learn how to meditate, that you want to practice meditation. You haven't quit. I've been coming here for the last couple of months now, about 6 weeks at least, I guess. And you're still coming, And that encourages me so much. To see people, no matter how difficult it might seem, they're still coming all of the time, And that really, I find that just so pleasing, to see people who are at least going to give it their best shot, And that's why I'm going to come again next week. You guys have got no idea how much I enjoy coming to Genting. It makes my week. It's something I really look forward to, is to come up here to Genting. Because I know that I'm going to see you people. And that no matter how difficult a week you've had, you're going to turn up and have another go. I love it. All right, so are there any questions before we wrap it up?